Religion has many victims, and these are the stories of how they survived. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to The Awakening. I'm your host, Heather.
And I'm your co-host, Tamara, aka Jezebel. Welcome.
And we are so excited once again to be back with you guys. We have a really incredible guest with us today. We have Melissa Duge Spiers. She's the author of Holy Disobedience, Sex, Sin, and Secrets in the Biggest Church No One Knows. Because a lot of people are not aware of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, are they, Melissa?
They are not. It is a huge organization. It's larger than the Mormons, actually worldwide, and the SBC. But it is, until now, hopefully my book will change that. We can talk about a few things that might change that this year, but they are completely under the radar. Nobody knows.
Yes. And me, I grew up in evangelical spaces. T, you grew up Pentecostal, right?
Apostolic Pentecostal. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And even though we were part of those spaces, I knew about the Seventh-day Adventist Church
right.
being a church, but I never knew what went on behind closed doors, what
Right.
went on behind the scenes. We always knew about what went on with the Jehovah's Witnesses. We always knew about what went on with the Mormons, but I
Yeah.
never knew a thing about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we're
Yeah.
really excited to have you here with us today. You are our first guest from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So
You wouldn't believe how many times I've heard that.
Probably a lot. And thank you and welcome for being with us and accepting. It's
Yeah,
a joy. Thank you.
absolutely.
So we're just
Happy
going
to
to
be.
rip off the Band-Aid and get started. So we
Okay.
want to we ask questions about what your life was like growing up. What was the environment like that you grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, it's without going into all the nitty-gritty about the church, but it considers itself a basically fundamentalist Christian organization, right? So they believe every word of the Bible is absolutely literally true. And they especially pull out the worshiping on Saturday thing as their like specific, that's why we're chosen, the only remnant, blah, blah, blah. They also had a prophet who her name was Ellen G. White. And so they also follow a lot of her rules. She brought in this dietary stuff that and a lot of just behavioral rules. So the way I was raised, um, I was on the more conservative end, I suppose, of Adventism. There's a spectrum, as there is in every religion,
Yeah.
really. We were in the more conservative mainstream end of it. And we had no television, no movies. We weren't allowed to go to movies. You couldn't listen to any contemporary music, particularly music with a rock beat. The drums were from the devil. Um, so you couldn't have drums or like we didn't have praise, worship music or whatever other than choir in church, certainly, or in school. And the dietary rules are no caffeine, no alcohol, of course, no tobacco, etc. And no meat, it's vegetarian, and no spices of any kind because the prophet and I can go into that a little bit later, but John Harvey Kellogg, the cornflakes guy, was also part of founding the Adventist
Oh,
Church.
okay.
And I don't know how much you know about him, but he made
Yeah.
cornflakes because it was supposed to dampen lust and bodily
Yes.
whatever. And so part of that Ellen White decreed was anything that was spicy or inflamed your body in any way would encourage lust. The church is incredibly afraid of sex of all kinds. Um, so we had Adventists are big on education and healthcare, which is not the usual, like JWs obviously aren't.
Yeah.
So we went to Adventist schools our entire lives. My sister even went on to Adventist college. There's an Adventist medical school. They just can keep you in the bubble
Your
regardless.
entire life. Yeah.
Yeah, it is basically an end times cult, but they refuse to acknowledge that, right? But there is a huge emphasis, part of growing up, that leaves lasting scars along with the purity culture and everything else is the end times thing. We were taught that Jesus was going to come back at any point in our lifetimes, and we had to be ready, and we were going to be crucified by the general populace, and particularly the Catholic Church. For some reason, they have this thing that the Catholic Church is from the devil. Um, and that we even had these rehearsals and things where we would have to run to the hills, and we were going to be tortured. And were we ready to give up our 8-year-old lives with a
Yeah.
gun to our head for worshiping on Saturday or whatever? And so that was lasting trauma. You were terrified, literally
Oh,
terrified. And a lot of my friends, they had to go to these camps where they made them eat bugs and all kinds of things to kind of prepare for end times. And
wow.
I missed out on that because we weren't allowed to do any activities like that. And then let me see. So that's kind of the big picture. Obviously, the worshiping on Saturday is they observe, like Judaism, from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. You
Yeah.
can do nothing but worship God. Some Adventists even won't cook, won't do anything. We were allowed to cook, but you couldn't do any activities, you couldn't go swimming, you couldn't do any sports. You literally had to just worship God that whole 24-hour period. And then, of course, you had church every Saturday, multiple things. And in Adventist school, we had what was called religion class every single day, but it was just Adventist stuff. We didn't learn
Yeah.
certainly about any other religions except how bad the Catholics were. Um, and then we also had chapel every morning. And then at night, we had family worship every night, which was led by Father, head of the household. And we read either Ellen White's writings or the Bible. And so it was, I like to say my theological spiritual, I guess, although it wasn't really spiritual, it was mostly dogmatic. Uh, Inbox was just perpetually overstuffed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, my goodness, you are describing a lifestyle of nothing but Adventism, right? Like
Yeah,
that was
right.
your entire life. Like you
Yes,
don't get an escape. Like I got to go to public school, right? But you didn't get
right,
that. You went to an Adventist school. So
right.
everything that you were submersed in was that cult framing. And
Yes,
it's
exactly.
wild that they accept the words of a woman, which is crazy to me because
It's
I was raised in evangelical Christianity where women did not have a voice or a place. So I find that very fascinating that they,
yeah,
you know,
doubly fascinating because to this day they won't ordain women, but yet
yeah,
their prophet
Oh,
was a woman.
that's,
So I mean, and
huh,
they're very into
yeah.
traditional roles for men and women, but yet the prophet was a woman. So it's ridiculous. But yes, I mean, they are, again, cult, where we weren't actually raised in a compound, but it was a psychological compound,
Oh,
right? It was
absolutely.
nothing. The town that I went to high school in, where the seminary was, they had, multiple Adventist schools, etc. Even the grocery store was Adventist, the post worker was Adventist. Like we were
Wow.
encouraged never to have contact with the outside world,
hmm.
particularly children, right? Adults held jobs where they did, but we didn't belong to, say, Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
So we didn't know anything outside the circle, very intentionally so. So it was a very blinders on upbringing.
Was the atmosphere that you were in this world, but you were not a part of this world?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
that's very much the
Mhm.
dogma and the rhetoric that a lot of high controlled religions have that I was raised in as well, is that you learned how to walk through the world that you lived in and not associate with anybody because they weren't going to heaven.
Right,
You know, I
exactly.
mean, we're like get that mindset when we would see people just like uh, walking differently or wearing their clothes, like the regular norm of society, right? My dresses were to my ankles, my collarbones were covered, my wrists were covered, my hair was in a bun, I had pantyhose on. And the way they taught us that that was okay is that we were separated from this world, that we were in this world, but not a part of it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, the Adventist phrase is in the world but not of the world. And that
Right.
Yes.
that was hammered into our heads absolutely. And for children, we were really they tried to keep us even separate from any of the worlding even,
Mhm.
or
Oh,
in the,
yeah.
it was just um
And I'm beginning to think like if you weren't raised a Catholic, you were taught to hate the Catholics. I swear,
Right.
because I was taught to
yes,
hate the Catholics too. They were the worst. We were taught that they were the ones that were always out there touching the little kids and stuff, like it was the
yes,
Catholics and the gays that were hurting kids. It was
And,
never
right.
the
Oh yes.
Christians.
and Melissa,
Yes.
I was raised that I wasn't a Christian. So when I left the cult that I was raised in, right, it was really kind of like at 27, I had to wrap my mind around the fact that, wow, I was a Christian. So when people talk about Christianity, I was like, I wasn't a Christian. They're like, well, what did you believe in? I was like, I was apostolic Pentecostal. That's not Christianity.
Ah.
Yeah.
Oh, so interesting. Well, and of course, all of them, and I'm sure the three of us were all told the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, I
You're
was
the
God's
only,
chosen. Yeah.
you're only true. And then,
Mhm.
yeah,
And I'm always amazed now that I'm meeting so many new people and new different religions and stuff, how all of us were taught that we were the only ones
Yeah.
going to heaven and we were God's special ones and that we were the ones that were chosen of God. And I believed it. And it was like it took me
Mhm.
years once I left the cult to say, I'm not special. Wait
Yeah,
a minute,
Exactly.
I'm not special, but
totally.
people don't understand that, but you're raised to believe that you are.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. And it comes with a lot of judgment and a lot of superiority
Yes.
complex. It took me a long time to unlearn that superiority thing that they give
Right.
you.
Yeah.
It's really
Exactly.
pathetic.
What are some what are some of the messages about yourself that stay with you throughout your lifetime being raised this way?
There was that superiority and just judge, judge, judge. You just judge everything and everybody. And we got that very heavily from my mother also in terms of judging people's looks and just we were we were just superior and chosen in everything. So that was a very difficult thing to unlearn, which sounds so silly because like why do you believe that? Like that is ridiculous. Why can't you just
Right.
abandon that? But you have to deprogram. And then also all of the messages of purity culture were very hard to unlearn in various ways. And I went out at 17 and just like started having sex, and I thought I was curing that problem. And you realize over time that like, no, you didn't just
Yes.
cure it by having sex. There's a whole ball of
Yes.
wax in there that has to really be investigated. And also, I think the worst part that I still struggle with to this day for sure is the submission conditioning and obedience, and just the fact that you were taught not to trust your gut, not to
Yes.
listen to your feelings. Those were bad, those were evil.
Yes.
Everything human was bad. And so you kind of grew up just looking for authority, obeying authority everywhere.
Hmm.
And I find myself still doing it all the time
Oh,
and
yes.
getting really like, oh my God, I have to do that. When I think there's a rule or I think there's an expectation. And if I sit with it and think about it, it's like there's really nothing there, Melissa, that you need to obey
Yeah.
to
Hmm.
make everything right. But that's your programming.
Your conditioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For me, like self-worth was a big thing. Like I had to learn how to actually love myself, right? Because I was conditioned
Yes.
not to. I was conditioned that I was filthy crap. Like I'm just a
Right.
piece of
Yes.
garbage. My righteousness will never measure up, right? But
Yep.
that when you tell yourself that messaging for years, like I was part of the church for 36 years. So for 36 years, I was telling myself, you're nothing but a piece of crap. Well, you're
Right.
not going to just get over that overnight. You have to work through deprogramming all that crap that was put inside of you by these other people. And you're
Yep.
right. Like Tia said it before on this show, but we'll find ourselves falling back into familiar patterns because we were
Totally.
trained to behave a certain way. We were trained to shrink ourselves. We were
Yep.
trained to automatically obey, to look for that man in charge. And it takes a lot of work to start looking for a woman instead when you're used to
Right.
looking for a man or
Yep.
looking for yourself because you were
Yep.
never taught to go to yourself either, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I found myself like to this day, if there's a man of authority that asked me a question and he asked me that question on the spot and wants an answer, I'll instantly like bow my eyes a little bit, and then I'll
yep,
have to like remember who I am almost and just like purposely look at him in
yep,
his face. But sometimes that is like a complete inner thought and behaviors that's going through my head. Like, Tamara, look up, look him in the face, answer the question. There is no reason for you to cow down and instantly just because you think he has authority. And that has probably been one of my longest struggles
Yeah.
out of indoctrination. And that's been a 25-year
yeah,
deprogramming, and that I
Yeah.
have to continuously remind myself that take a deep breath. I am who I am. I can say what I need to say, and this is okay.
yep,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of work that will never stop for us.
Right.
It's
yes.
just,
So, when did you begin to notice that those messages didn't work for you and they didn't fit you anymore?
um, I did it in such a piecemeal fashion. And I don't know if that's typical of everyone else, but certainly that was mine. So I did all of the behavioral casting aside, that stuff just never worked for me to begin with. The purity culture, I just never thought that sex was a bad thing. I just didn't believe them, and
Yeah,
I didn't for whatever reason. And I just didn't believe that a God, if there was one, would deprive us of so much fun stuff. Like when I was very, very young, in the single digits, my life was all about gymnastics. And once you get up to a certain level of competition, all the competitions are on Saturdays, and we were not allowed to compete. And so then the coaches don't want to spend time with you because you're not competing for
Mhm.
them. And so I was a has-been by about 10. And
Wow.
it broke my heart. And I think at that point, that was the first point where God and I had some beef, right? Where I was just like, if there's a God, why would he take this away from me for something so stupid? Like there's this random day where I can't do anything. Like it just didn't
yeah,
make sense to me. And so there was a lot of that. Like I didn't understand why if there was a God, he let so many bad things happen. And I would try to argue with my dad, and my dad would be about like, oh, choice and whatever that is, like free
yep,
will. And I'd be like, but
yes,
whose free will is it that a dog is suffering
Right.
or a baby is
yep,
suffering? And like none of that made sense to me very early on. And so I think I kind of like, they say we're all born atheist and then you
yeah,
are indoctrinated. And
yes,
I just think the indoctrination never quite stuck for me. And there was
yeah.
always that little atheist in the back of my head saying, but this is bullshit,
Right.
And so, but I had to play along because I didn't know anything else. And I did believe we
Mm.
were
Yes.
special and we were chosen. So, and I kind of believed the end times stuff because it was just so scary. And I believed in a devil for sure.
Yeah. In
And
hell.
so, there was all this
Yep.
weird stuff that cognitive dissonance, right? Um, so then in high school, when I started to focus on the purity culture and the fact that Adventists are so scared of sex in so many ways, and so then I just went out and I had sex. And that was the beginning of the dominoes officially falling,
Yeah.
where I just felt like this is all completely ridiculous. And so from there on, I was physically out and mentally out. Like I was pretty much an atheist at that point, and I went on and I lived decades of just regular life. And but that stuff that we were talking about, finally deprogramming of the submission and the obedience and the lack of boundaries and the all of that stuff, I really just started to come to terms with in the past probably 6 years, like shortly before COVID. I
Yeah.
really started looking at that stuff
Gosh,
and
that's
being like, wait a minute, I have been in my secular life just going through a lot of this stuff that's so unhealthy, but I didn't know. I think when you're raised, and I just have been working with this for the past year, of emotional immaturity. Like
yeah.
when you're there's that phrase about if you become famous, um, your emotional development stops at the age that you became famous. And
Yeah.
I think there's a correlation in religion, like your emotional development stops when you are indoctrinated not to trust yourself. And for
Absolutely.
us, that was what, 4, 5 years
5.
old. So I think there's all of that stuff, that really deep personal stuff that I've really only been reckoning with, certainly in the past 10 years. I started therapy and I really started unpacking.
Yeah.
So, this unpacking, it has led to you starting to advocate for victims of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You
Right.
did write your memoir. So, you
Yep.
want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah. I started writing it about 20 years ago because a huge piece of my life just like exploded when we found out that my dad, who had been my hero all my life, I just thought he was magical, and he was very kind of, I say worshipped, but that's the wrong word when we're talking about religious things. He was very looked up to and admired in
Honored
the
and
Seventh-day
revered.
Adventist
Yep.
Church. He was a doctor, but he was also a pastor, and we found out that he had been a child predator when he had been a youth pastor in the Adventist church, like when I was a baby. And that was just enormous. It just, my whole world, even though I'd been out of the church forever, I, I just couldn't, it just crazy imploded all of my life. But I was in the beginning stages of having children and all that stuff. So I started writing about that story just because I'm a writer and I needed to unpack
Yeah.
it. But I really had no intention of publishing it. And then when I was researching schools for my young children, I just happened across this article. I mean, literally chance. Um, an article about a horrible sex abuse case in the Adventist Academy school system. And in it, they interviewed all of these victims of sex abuse in the Adventist church. And it was just like, I can't even, like, my whole body drops when I even talk about it still. I realized as I read that this particular woman was talking about my dad.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was just like, holy fuck. And so I wrote to her. They had her name in that article. Apparently, she had asked them not to put her name in it. I learned later, but they put her name in it mistakenly anyway. And so I tracked her down and I wrote to her and I was just like, I need answers. You may not want to hear from me, but I am struggling with this. And she is the most amazing person. We are now friends. We've been friends for 20 years. I call her Dr. Z in the book because she doesn't want to be identified, and she's got a great life. And she really helped me. And so for a while, I was writing this book as my kids grew up, still just in bits and pieces, thinking that it was a story about how I discovered this horrible thing about my dad and their story. And Dr. Z kept kind of, she was so open and so giving with anything that I ever asked, but she kept kind of saying in various ways, like, you don't need to know this one particular story. Like, she was at peace with it. She had gotten as an adult to confront my dad like head on, just like she'd
Oh,
gotten to
that's
say her
awesome.
piece. And so she was not as upset about that as she was that the Adventist church, when it happened, and then again when she had reported it much later, like, basically when I found out about my dad as an adult was when she had kicked up some shit with the church, and said, this man cannot still be preaching. He's a danger. And the Adventist church had betrayed her again
Oh,
when
wow.
she had said, remove him from any official posts. And they said, oh, yes, okay, we will, as long as you don't go public and you don't sue. And so that had been their agreement. And within weeks of that agreement, they had put my dad back in positions of, and his sermons were being YouTubed and this and that. And so she felt like she'd been screwed over by the church twice.
Yeah.
And so she kept kind of pushing me toward that. And I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to look at, like, deal with the church. I was like, I'm out of that shit. I didn't,
Right.
and
Not my circus.
yeah, exactly. Not my circus. Yeah. Um, but then, again, around COVID time, I just started talking on social media about this weird church that I was raised in. And people started telling me their stories of abuse. And so I was like, oh my God, I really need to, I feel like I'm in a kind of unique position because I was not abused in the Adventist church. So I don't have those triggers and that baggage to bring to speaking out.
Yeah.
But I still have this incredibly personal connection to it where I just feel so viscerally that justice needs to be made.
Yeah.
And so I started interviewing victims and I started maintaining lists of abuse in the Adventist church, and people just kept talking to me, and it just it snowballed. And so then I dusted off the book and I thought, this is what I was meant to write about. And I can come at it through my personal experience. But the bigger issue is this enormous organization that has never been held accountable for anything,
Yeah.
and they are the reason that conversion therapy is such a big deal. And they are responsible for female genital mutilation in the United States and they are, they have the hugest sex abuse problem, just like the Catholics, just like all the rest. Um, and they're involved in so much anti-LGBTQ stuff right now, and they just get away with it. And
Yeah.
like Ben Carson is a Seventh-day Adventist, and he wrote chapters of Project 2025. Like, they've got their fingers in everything, but nobody knows about them. And so I was like, okay, this is one thing I can do.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
how
Because, like, we didn't know like a whole lot about what went on behind closed doors within the
Yeah,
Seventh-day Adventist Church.
yeah.
and how did that how did you reconcile with yourself knowing that you weren't abused, yet knowing that your dad, who you idolized or looked up to, was an abuser?
It's an ongoing struggle, of
Mhm.
course. I think the way I made peace with it was our whole upbringing. We were told that you can only have a binary. There's good, there's evil, you know, and that's not the way life works.
Yeah.
And you can't smush the black and the white into just gray and make it all soft and easy either. It's
Mhm.
sharp edges, and it's not reconcilable so much of life. And so I've made my peace with the fact that this is the person that I grew up with and who has given me so much in life that was very valuable. And he was also this person
Yeah.
who was, grooming teenage girls and telling them he loved them, and, all that kind of stuff that was clearly absolutely reprehensible. And so there is no easy answer. There really is not.
Yeah.
And so I've made my peace with knowing that I can't adjudicate between, which I thought was my responsibility when I first found out about it. Like, I felt like I needed to apologize to Dr. Z, like somehow it was my responsibility.
Mhm.
And she and he have had their thing, and there are other victims, and I don't know what their status is. I have a feeling possibly my book is going to bring more people out of the woodwork, but I'll deal with that when I get there, right? Um, but I cannot answer for my dad. I can only try to help bring this whole issue to light. And so
Hmm.
that's where I'm putting my energy.
Yeah.
And I have to accept that it's really messy and
Now,
it's not,
you had posted the other day on your
yeah.
Instagram, you were looking for people that have been a victim of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You want to talk about that just a second? Because I'd love to let our listeners know about what it is that you're trying to do there as well.
Yes. Yes. So that's part of 2026 being hopefully the Adventist Church reckoning a little bit. So my book is coming out, and then I was absolutely fortunate enough to be just a tiny piece of helping this huge lawsuit come into being. There is a law firm called Pintus and Mullins, and we can probably put the links here
Yes,
when
I will put the links in the
it
description.
is a
Yes.
personal injury law firm out of Chicago, and they have done a lot of work with victims of the Catholic Church. And in January, they opened what's called a mass tort lawsuit against the Adventist Church representing victims. And if your listeners don't know what a mass tort is versus a class action, that's an important distinction. And a class action suit is one lawsuit that everybody joins, and then if it wins, everybody gets a little piece of that pie. And if you missed the deadline for that lawsuit, you're SOL basically.
Yeah.
Whereas a mass tort is a loss, it is ongoing litigation against an entity where they can prove that there is a pattern.
Yeah.
And they take individual cases and they will keep prosecuting, bringing these individual cases before court as long as there are cases that want to be heard.
Yeah.
And every case can kind of build on the next one, right? Because that's more showing the pattern, etc. So
Yep.
I was able to, all those lists and all those people I had interviewed, I was able to help the law firm kind of, establish that pattern
Yeah.
already. And then, uh, and now I just every once in a while bring it up on social media and say, hey, if there's anybody out there, this is going on. Um, and it's a wonderful thing. It's about damn time.
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen, the Catholic Church, they've had several different lawsuits brought against them, and we've seen several dioceses go completely bankrupt because
Yeah.
Hmm.
of those, and we saw the thing with the SBC about 3 years ago with the
Yeah.
huge list. And then it was just a couple of months ago, I think it was either the Assemblies of God or the Church of God. They had been
Yes.
outed for covering it up for over 50 something years. So,
Yep.
Hmm.
yeah, it's about dang time they get the Seventh day Adventist Church too, because when they say it's not my church, they're lying.
Yeah.
They are
Exactly.
lying. It's happening in every single denomination across America.
And not
Yep.
only that, being on TikTok, I came on around COVID time as well. And honestly, I thought I was the only apostolic Pentecostal girl out there that kind of left. And over the last several years, I have been very much aware that other women are speaking out and they do the same thing, but they're such an independent type of religion, it's kind of off the United Pentecostal Church and then it's Apostolic Pentecostal Church, that there's not like a huge organization, there's not leaders and those kind of things. Everybody kind of runs their church in their own little pod
Mhm.
per se, and then the
Yeah.
ministers all report to each other, but there's no board, there's nobody for them to be held accountable for. But I have noticed over the last several years people are starting to speak out about that as well, and it's like always so interesting to me because so many times the pastors are just go to a different state, start
Well,
churches somewhere else, just ignore that well, they're just a man of God like David was, they're forgiven. And
yeah.
it is completely, David was a man after God's own heart. These men are good men, they just made a mistake.
Yep.
And
But
that's the, you hit right on the problem of it. And I fight on social media every day with people who are
mm,
like, it's just individuals, it's
Yep.
just, and forgiveness and blah, blah,
Yep.
blah.
That was
And
your church.
that's right, exactly. And that is so not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the organizations who
right.
move them around
Yes.
and
Hmm.
just continue. I mean, at this point, there is so much evidence that child predators and child abusers, and I use those two terms because they are different things a little bit.
Yeah.
But the whole ball of wax there is they are repeat offenders. They are
Yes.
Right.
not rehabilitatable to a very large extent unless they really commit to reprogramming and therapy and all that stuff. Moving them does absolutely zero except give
Yep.
them a free playground yet again. And and this is known. And the fact that churches still do this over and over, there's a case right now that I've been talking about on the social media for the past week or so, where a guy over 3 decades was moved at least 6 different places within the Adventist Church in Canada and the US. And everywhere he's been, and he and his wife are now claiming, oh, we had no idea. We didn't know that there was a case against,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. And it's absolute bullshit
Yes.
because the gossip system within these organizations is highly tuned. Everybody knows what's going on.
Yep.
So the fact that, oh, we didn't know from the church is bullshit.
It is
First of
Right.
all,
bullshit because
yeah,
you know what? The moms know. They know exactly who to keep their kids away from because I'll tell you what,
exactly.
I always knew who the creepy dude was in church. But we
Exactly.
never called him
Exactly.
out and we never asked him to leave. He was
Yep.
always allowed wherever he wanted to be. And it's
Yep.
like we all
Exactly.
knew who he was, though. Why
Yeah.
didn't we just be like, get rid of the creepy dude? Why are we having to
Yeah.
be hyper vigilant around our kids, you know?
Yep.
But they
Yep.
And
would
the
never do
Exactly.
that.
But they
And the
don't.
other thing, no, and the other thing is that I think sometimes where I can find or identify my anger or just kind of like is because there's no accountability, and the
Right.
accountability lies on my shoulder. The shame lies on the other little girl's shoulders
Right.
for anything that happens or anything that has done. And it's like, oh, but then how do I talk about it when my father or the minister is such a good man to everybody else, but when the sun goes down, becomes an absolute monster. And then it's like, who do you tell that story to? Because everybody's like, but he's such a good man.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah. The shame
anointed
is
of
put on the
God.
kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
That
it goes
was,
on for
absolutely.
years, and you sit
yep.
there going, how and in my own personal life, right? It's like, how do I wrap my head around about, like you said, that he's a good man, but this is what he does all the time. How is that a good man? And
Yep.
Yeah.
where do you finally come to the point that you're able to say out loud, that is not a good man?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Because
Yeah.
it's
then you have
really
to sit
hard.
with that.
Yeah, and it's really hard to have to look at somebody that is like your father, for my example, like, and say, wow, my dad was really a terrible human being. Like the
Yeah.
majority of my life, he was a bad man. He was not a good man. But
Mm.
patriarchy taught me to honor him no matter what, to make
Yeah.
excuses for him no matter what. My mom made so many excuses for my father. Oh, you just know how your dad is. He was an ass. He was
Yeah.
cruel. He was
Yeah.
abusive. But that's
Yep.
just how he is. Like I
Yeah.
learned how to walk on eggshells because my mom taught me how to
Yeah.
not poke the
Yeah.
bear, you know? And it's
And
like,
All men have tempers.
that was
That's
what
just
happened
something.
with Dr. Z also, was that she was blamed because it happened between the ages of like 12 and 14 for her. And so my mother, the church, everybody, oh, she was tempting him. She was chasing him. She was pursuing him. She was just a tawdry little, tramp. And when you're 12 and you're 14, excuse me,
you're
like,
not a
no,
tawdry little
but they
tramp.
do that.
Yes.
They blame especially when it's teenagers like that. I mean,
Yes.
little
Or
kids,
Jezebel.
Yep.
Right, exactly. And for little kids, particularly if it's same-sex molestation, they use the excuse of this is going to hurt. If this goes public, if you report this, if
Oh,
you talk about it, it's going to hurt the child. You don't want the child to be hurt
yep.
and exposed. We'll deal with this. We'll
Mhm.
we'll we'll deal with this. You just, and then of course they don't. They just move the perpetrator and then but
Or
but
we're left with a
certainly when
family
it's
teenagers.
teenagers, they blame
Yeah.
the victim.
And we're left with the family shame. I mean, I heard all my life, there are some things you don't ever say out loud because
Right.
that will bring shame upon the family.
Yep.
And your brother is married to the minister's daughter, and this one's married to this one, and the
Right.
amount of embarrassment that you'll cause our family just
Yep.
cannot be.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Mhm.
And it was the same way for
Absolutely.
us. We didn't talk about family business outside of the family. Like we just
Mm-mm.
Right.
didn't. Like, and like T was raised, like you don't go outside of the church for help. You don't go because those people
Oh,
are all sinners. They're gonna drag you to hell.
We were
right.
told not to
Right.
go to Egypt for help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
And
Yeah.
were
it's
told
like,
that if there was any type of abuse that happened within the walls of this church, the pastor got up on the last day I was there on June 30th, and he said, any child abuse, sexual abuse, drug abuse, incest abuse, um, domestic violence abuse, any kind of abuse that happens within the four walls of this church house will be handled by the men of this church. And if you don't want to obey what I've just said, as he walked down the aisle of that church and looked at me, he said, you can leave. And I'd already been shamed for a year sitting on the back of the pew because I had brought forth the truths of severe domestic violence and stuff. And I walked up to my mom and dad and I said, please kiss your grandbabies goodbye because the God of my childhood is not the God I'm serving today, and I will never be back. And I
Mm.
walked out of church and left everything from the church house that day.
and
Good
she
for
did.
you.
She fled
Good
with her
for you.
kids, and that was it. Like, but the reality is that when we walk away from these spaces, it's not just walking away from a building. It's
Um,
walking away from your entire family sometimes,
Right.
right.
like your
Yeah.
entire life is surrounded around these people and what they believe, and it takes so much to unpack all of that harm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like you said, we're still healing, right? I've been
Yeah.
at this
Right.
8+ years outside of religious institutions, and just yesterday, I found out that I have PTSD from religious trauma. And I'm telling you what, that made me mad. Like the church gave me PTSD. Come on. But then you have people that want to deny that religious trauma is real. And I'm like, dude, I have PTSD. I promise you, it's real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is what being raised in these spaces does to you when you're
Yeah.
completely isolated from the outside world. You
Yep.
don't know anything of it. And I
Mhm.
think that was my biggest thing when I started to experience the world. It was nothing like what the church had presented it to be.
Right.
You know, gay people were going to send me to hell. They were so evil. Like everybody was evil that wasn't a believer. And I ended up finding that those tended to be the most kind, caring, and compassionate people that I'd ever known in my life. I
So,
never met people like that before in religious spaces. And
yeah.
it
And how
took
do
me
you
leaving those spaces to find people like that.
And
Yeah.
Melissa, you may have found this too, and I know Heather and I have talked about it many, many times, is that when you leave, right? When you've been taught that it's so evil and so horrible and so awful, reconnecting to a world that you don't even feel like you're a part of, and then you're like, oh, I have to find a job. I need to go to college. How do I maneuver these things? How do I walk through my daily life? This is not even something that I even, and then it's just like the whole world implodes because the people
Yeah.
that you have been considered evil your whole life have now just been the ones who have offered help and extended hands, and the ones that you thought were absolutely unconditional love,
Yeah.
you have to come to
Yeah.
terms with everything was conditional.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
have nothing to base our life on either. Like, people, when they're
Yeah.
growing up, they have all these
Mm.
cultural references, like,
Totally.
Saved by the
Not
Bell or whatever. And it's like, I didn't get that shit. We weren't allowed to watch secular television programming. They called the TV the devil's eye, for goodness
Oh, yeah.
sakes.
Yeah. Yep.
So My dad, I remember we actually had good music in the house. He had all kinds of really great rock albums. But then he started hooking up with this Russian Orthodox preacher. And then one day he came home and he broke them all. And then we
Oh,
were no longer allowed to have any secular music in the house. And I
yeah.
was so heartbroken because then I was stuck listening to damn Hosanna Integrity. I was so excited when DC Talk came out because I was like, oh my God, there's actually like kind of cool Christian
Yeah.
music, like I
Yeah.
wore that CD out.
I didn't know I was alive when Elvis was alive. I thought he was like part of the old days. And it's amazing to me when things happen and I'm like, well, what year was that? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I was alive when that happened.
Yeah.
People
And I
used
have
Yeah.
to
to put
crack
it back in
jokes.
my timeline.
Yeah, and my friends, they would crack jokes with me about sex and stuff like that because there were so many terms and things that I didn't know. And they would
Right.
just think it was hilarious that, like, how are you this old and you don't know what this is? It's like, I didn't know anything. I didn't
Yeah.
even know what keeping your purity was until my mom had the birds and bees talk with me. And by the time she had that talk, my purity had already been taken from me and I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
Like, this is the reality of being raised in these places. You're not taught what you need to be taught about yourself or people that you're in community with or the outside world. You're actually taught things to blindly trust people, especially men. And we
Right.
all know men are our number one natural predators. So we're
Right.
literally taught to blindly trust the people that would hurt us the most. And
Yep.
that just, it frustrates me. And I guess that's
Yeah.
why we talk all the time about it.
No, it's really, really true. Yeah. I remember when I was in college, so I went to a non-Adventist college. That was my first, experiences in the real world, really. And all of my girlfriends I learned about fooling around, which I totally, we were taught that men had this insatiable sex drive,
Yeah.
right? And once things started, you could not stop it.
Yes. Yep.
And
Right.
it would be wrong if you stopped it because then they'd get, what are blue balls. They didn't call it that. That was basically what they were implying. And so I had never, even though I was out of the church and I was having sex at that point, it had never occurred to me, and I struggled with it for years still, of just fooling around because I thought it was fun and the idea that I could stop it at any point and we
Yeah.
didn't have to go all the way. Like
Third
it
base.
never occurred to me. And I didn't realize that I was a 50% partner in this and it was for my joy too. And so if I was not into it for whatever reason, if I was just tired or whatever and I wanted to go home, I could just be like, okay, that's enough and go home.
Yeah.
Never occurred to me. And these girls were doing this most of them weren't sleeping with too many guys. They were just having fun, going out and making out with somebody after a bar. And I was just gobsmacked. Like
Right.
I could not believe that this is the way the world
And
worked.
you're like, I have permission. Like, I can
Right.
actually not follow. But see, we
Yeah,
were taught that when he wanted it, you just lay down and do whatever you got
that's
to do and
it.
endure. You don't like, you don't
That's
say no, you don't stop it. You lay there till it's over, right?
And
Like,
totally,
Melissa,
totally.
I thought it was cool because I would walk around and say, up into my last relationship, I've never had a headache.
Mm,
And then I realized what I was saying. And I was like, what
that's
am I
yeah,
part of your
saying?
conditioning. Yep.
yeah.
I am so conditioned that I'm saying that I have never ever said I'm tired, I'm sick, I just had surgery, this just happened or that
Right,
just happened.
right.
I'm like, what does that say about me that I am still so tied up at 50 years of age in patriarchal
Yep.
type of promoting, supporting, and speaking out and saying these things. Here I am. I'm like, I'm an independent woman, and I'm this or that, and I'm walking around going, well, I've never had a headache.
Yeah. 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 I mean, and even way late in life, sometimes you find yourself saying like, well, it's just easier. It's just easier to go
Yes.
along with it because he wants sex and whatever. I don't
Yep.
and that's fine. I love him, so whatever. Even when you're not in that religious space at all, that
Right.
programming is
Yes.
just so,
And it
you know,
takes a lot of work to unpack that. It really does. And
it
be able to
does.
say, you know what? I really don't feel like it today. So I'm going to
Yeah.
honor myself over
Yeah.
that. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
My poor
it's just,
therapist.
Yeah. No, it's true. I had a space in between my first marriage and my last relationship where my second husband was incredibly a wonderful guy, and we had a what you would call a really good marriage and a good relationship. And uh I was again emotionally immature, and I hadn't processed all that stuff yet. And so when the chance came to go with the domineering, awful, abusive man, I ran off to that. And so you, even when you get the opportunity
Mhm.
to start healing and going in a good position, unless you've done that processing, you're just going to
Yes.
fall back into that programming.
Yeah, because
Exactly.
you're always looking for that same thing. Like, and for us, like, we were raised in such a rigid structure, right? So
Hmm.
we knew exactly what to expect, exactly what to look for. We knew how people would behave in community with us. So being out here in the real world all on our own is so terrifying sometimes because we
Yeah.
don't have that structure.
Yes.
And there's still that programming in us. So we're still looking. We're still
Yep.
looking for what it is that we were trained to find. But
Yep.
we have to rework our brain, rework those neural pathways so we're not seeking out things that are harmful for us,
Right.
And not only
because
Yeah.
that,
that's really what it is, and we don't even realize it.
it was
Yeah.
so important also to make sure that what you realize is that it's old patterns.
Yep.
Like, I know how to play in a patriarchy sandbox. I know what's expected of me. I know what's required. I know how to be an atheist and a Proverbs 31 woman in the same sentence. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? And it was like, so it's like, well, it's okay. And then I'm like, well, if I'm really speaking my truth to power, this is not okay. And how do I work through all this
Yeah.
shit? And yeah, and it was the end of a 14-year relationship, Luckily, thank goodness I wasn't married, but whenever you think of it, it's like it just becomes okay doing it because it's the pattern that I've been used to. And then
Yep.
it's like, well, if I want something different, I have to change my patterns. And I'm like, oh, at 50?
Right.
We're all out here learning new tricks.
So
So,
true.
Melissa, when does your book come out?
Oh, it comes out the end of this month. So pre-orders are open now for your
Yay.
listeners. You can go anywhere your books are sold. I just saw a video somebody made today where they were actually in Barnes and Noble placing their pre-order, which was so
Oh,
cute. I was
that's
like,
so cute. I love
oh,
that.
it was so cute. It hadn't occurred to me that people might do that, and it was just so fun to see. So it comes out officially March 31st. So that's
Okay.
when. But if you pre-order, apparently people who pre-order get theirs usually a week or even 2 weeks early.
Yes, you do.
So
You will get
Ooh,
them a little early because
a little early.
yes, I have pre-ordered books before and they actually ship them out to the people that have pre-ordered them first. So if you
Yes,
want to
it
be one of the first ones to read our book,
exactly. It's
pre-order
fun. Because
I'll
I
have
just
to
can't
go
wait
and
until
do
people
that.
get it in their hands and they can read it and we can talk about it, because
Yes,
that's
Yes.
absolutely.
but yes, so March 31st, and it comes out,
Okay.
there's an ebook, and because I think it's really important to tell all of our people in our ex-religious space, or even religious people still questioning, a lot of people, it's not safe to read a book that
Yes.
is a deconstruction book, especially one
Right.
like mine that says sex, sin, and secrets.
Yeah.
So there is an ebook. And there will be an audiobook as well. As you can tell, I'm still recovering. I had started reading it last month, and then I lost my voice for like 3 weeks. So we're a little behind on the
Yeah.
audiobook, but it will be coming out probably in April sometime. Um, so yes, it is available anywhere you buy your books.
Okay, well, we will put the links for your book in the show notes as always. I am so grateful that you were able to come and sit down with us today and have this
Thank you.
conversation. I love you so much. I'm a fangirl for life.
Love back to
You
you.
got two new groupies. We're gonna go pre-order.
And to our listeners, as always, if you guys like this episode, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss a show. Thank you for being here this week. We appreciate you guys so much.
Melissa, thank you very much for bringing
Of
awareness, for
course.
elevating your voice, and standing with us who have gone through religious trauma. And I think it's important for the whole world to know that it's just not one sect.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
many
There's
different
many.
faiths that cause harm.
many.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Absolutely.
If I drown
religion has many victims, and these are the stories of how they survived.
The preceding podcast is solely owned by the host or hosts and is distributed by Big Media LLC. Copyright 2026.